Hello, fun people. I'm Isaac Carlson, and I'm Following Dreams. I'm focused on exploring the stories of people who are following their passions and achieving their dreams. I want to help inspire you to pursue what you love by hearing how others have done it. If you're new to the show, consider rating the podcast on iTunes. Hearing about your experiences, listening to the stories of the guests that come on really motivates me and gets me excited to do more of these interviews. Today, I'm speaking to a woman who is obsessed with animation. Since 2012, she has worked with two other co-hosts to run the Animation Addicts podcast and has a team of people working the Rotoscopers website, which both focus on discussing, reviewing, and updating the world about the world of animation. While she began those projects while having a career in a corporate setting, she's recently taken the plunge into entrepreneurship, coaching, and content creation full-time. To see all of the insights she gives into business and animation. Oh my goodness. To see all of the insights she gives into business and animation, I'll leave links to everywhere she is online down below. Welcome, Morgan Stradling.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on. And regardless of how much I was stumbling over my words, I'm excited to be able to ask you a bunch of questions about what your experience is like in business and, you know, pursuing your own passions. And that's something that I always like to ask right at the beginning. What are you passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you kind of hit on one of the big things, which is animation and Disney animation specifically. That's something that I've always had an affinity for ever since I was a little girl. Just was obsessed with the process of animation and the animated films. And I was that girl, even at 7, 8 years old, who was looking forward to the newest animated films. I remember being so pumped for Lion King. And this was back in the days when they would announce the new film, the trailer for the next year's release you'd see it a year prior. So not only were we seeing the newest animated release, but then you would get to see the trailer for the one that's coming out next year. So I remember seeing Lion King, and the teaser trailer, I guess, that they had was basically a rough cut for Pocahontas for Colors of the Wind, where they had unfinished animation and complete animation and all of that behind the scenes process. It really was just always fascinating to me. And although I never pursued animation as a career, I continued to love that even through high school when it became not necessarily the cool thing to like Disney animation. I never strayed from that. And I always found friends, one of them who is my co-host, who would talk to me and have incredible conversations. We call them, we just sit on the couch and we talk about these Disney films. And so that's something that has never really gone away as I've grown up. And I do think a lot of people, while they love Disney, right? Most people do, that hardcore love for a particular aspect of it, isn't they're not sitting here like analyzing the films and doing that on a weekly basis.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something I've recently learned about. Like when I was researching like Fantasia 2000 recently, I found out that like typically it was like, as you talked about, at the release of the the newest movie, and then they would do a different trailer for like VHS releases too. It's like that's when they would showcase them as well. That's super cool. Now it seems like everyone's just like waiting by the computers to get trailers now.
Oh yeah, and Disney nowadays, they have a very strict schedule on their marketing. They don't want to release too soon, but they'll let you know about it. But the real marketing efforts, you don't really see. You'll maybe get a teaser trailer a year in advance, but they're not going to play it in front of the movies, especially not now. But the real hardcore trailer, you usually don't get until at least 6 months, because the competition also is so much greater. There's so many more studios, animation, as well as other live action studios that are competing for their time. So it's totally changed compared to how it was in the 90s, when it was a little simpler times.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely. So could you talk about the events that led you to create the Animation Addicts podcast and the Rotoscopers website? How did you know that you wanted to make content about this passion of yours?
So I've always listened to podcasts since basically the beginning of podcasts. I remember the very first podcast I listened to was in 2005, and podcasting began in 2004. So very much an early adopter, not the earliest adopter, but I was in college. It was my first year of college in 2005. And I remember listening to MuggleCast and Pottercast because there weren't that many things available. But luckily, they were the big Harry Potter fan sites at the time. And so I would listen to them and then would listen to really not that many other podcasts, but I always listened to them. And then I came across this podcast by Clay Cadis, who worked at Disney Animation, and it was called the Animation Podcast. Very literal. And what he would do is he would interview greats in animation, of those that he worked with, some of his contemporaries, you know, just had these fantastic interviews, and I ate them up. And slowly, there was a few years where he was very consistent, as with many podcasters, right, and content creators. They have a lot of steam for a while, and then they lose that steam. And so his episodes became less and less. And he worked on Tangled, and they did like an unofficial director's commentary in 2010, 11. And anyways, it basically stopped. And there was really nothing left to fill the gap as far as animation podcasts go. And I'd always wanted to start a podcast. My co-host Chelsea and I, we'd always, listened to podcasts and thought it would be so fun to start our own. And so one day I decided, you know what, this is something that I really want to do. I already am talking to you all day long about animated film. So why don't we just sit in front of a microphone and record ourselves? And so that's basically the idea for the Animation Addicts podcast. And then I decided, well, you can't just have two, you got to have someone else to make it a little bit more well-rounded, and we're two females, so I really wanted a male perspective. So I brought my friend on, Mason, who at the time was studying pre-animation, so basically doing all the requisites to get into the animation program. So he had more of the artistic perspective, while Chelsea and I simply were the fans. Chelsea's expertise is she's a musician and a singer, so she'll usually go off on like the music aspects and like the industry, and I'm very much business, and so I always look at it from a business critical eye. So we definitely have a good group of hosts on the podcast, and so we just sat down and we recorded, and we've been going ever since.
That's super cool. It's interesting to hear about like you beginning to listen to podcasts, which is wild to me, because that was like even before like YouTube was really even created or something that's popular. Whereas like my background is just experiencing like content from YouTube. I really only started to learn about podcasts in the last few years. So that's interesting. Like having you come from the perspective of exploring that completely different type of content that was growing. Yeah. Because now it's a massive industry that people are pointing to much more often.
Oh yeah, a lot of people have podcasts now. And it's funny, I was talking to a group of people just last week, and I mentioned the podcast, and they're like, wow, you got on in the ground level. And I thought, oh, honey, no. I mean, for me, I thought I was late, coming in 7 years later into podcasting, but podcasting really has each and every year this huge surge, especially with smartphones and having how it's so much easier to just access podcasts, and people are more familiar with them, and people are just online more. So yeah, now it's totally, you can say podcast to your grandma. She may not know, but your mom and your dad, like they know what a podcast is. So it's becoming much more mainstream.
Yeah. Now it just seems like radio shows, and they just seem as easy to access as music. Whereas as those barriers have decreased, podcasting has been able to reach people at the same rate. And it's exciting. It's cool to be able to see audio grow as it has been.
Yeah. And it's so much easier to start a podcast now than it was when we started. I mean, there's literally programs you can just click a button and off you go. And it's very simple to get a microphone that works, or even people do it on their AirPods, and that has decent enough audio to get you started. So definitely it's a good time and easy to get started. Like you said, the barriers to entry for podcasting have gone way down.
So what was the process like to build your animation community? What was your strategy to manage your podcast and website?
Yeah, so we started the podcast. We called it it was initially the Rotoscopers podcast, and then quickly we rebranded it to something that was a little bit more SEO friendly, something that you could search. And that's kind of always been my big regret with Rotoscopers, is that the name is just really tough for people who don't know what it is. Like, you have to be a hardcore animation fan to really know what it was. And that was kind of the point, right? It was for fans by fans. But we kept the rotoscopers, that's kind of like our band name, but we broaden that out to anyone who's a lover of animation. You're a rotoscoper, right? Like you're not necessarily the one who is making the animated films, but you're kind of tracing over them. What rotoscoping is, it's an animation technique where you trace over live action footage and it creates a form of animation, right? It's very unique, and it's still very much used today in a lot of projects. And so anyone who's a rotoscoper, we say you're a fan of animation, then you're one of us. You're a rotoscoper as well. So we had the website basically as a way to have to host, so people could find our files. Obviously, we had the podcast host, but we wanted a landing page where people could go to find the show notes and whatnot. And then in the early days of the podcast, we were doing news. We always do an animated movie, but at the time we were doing a few news stories, and I was like, well, I don't want to give all this traffic to these other sites. Like, why don't I just write up the news stories that we're talking about, and put them on the site? And so I started writing these news articles, and we would talk about them. And then I kind of became obsessed with keeping up with the animation news. And so it was just me for a long time who would just write up all these news stories and post the podcast. And then, when you first start out with anything, it is so hard to gain an audience. And that is really what will cause people just to lose interest because no one's listening. A lot of times it just depends. Like the content could not be great and that's why no one's listening. But a lot of times your content could be really great, but just no one has a way of finding it and it just hasn't reached that tipping point where people are able to access it and share with their friends and have it gain momentum. But for us, I tried to promote the podcast on Twitter. I would reach out to big like Disney accounts and other, fan sites to have them promote our first episodes. And some people retweeted. Like, I don't recommend this strategy, where you're, like mass blasting a whole bunch of accounts, but I would never do it now, but that's what I did. And so we got 100 downloads for our first week, which I thought was phenomenal. And I remember looking at the charts and just being so excited. But really kind of the big break came 4 months later in May. I was at the mall and I was going to a movie, and this lady handed me a paper for a test screening of a movie, or an advanced screening a test screening where basically you don't really know. Sometimes you know what movie you're seeing and other times you don't, but it was for Wreck-It Ralph. And so for me, this was 6 months before the movie came out. I was like, oh my goodness. And so I grabbed a paper and I signed up and I had Chelsea come and we went and we saw the test screening of Wreck-It Ralph, which has, like we were talking about those old trailers back in the day. It's, whatever is completed of the film up until that point, they will show you. So sometimes it's just storyboards, other times it's complete animation, sometimes it's a mix of both. And it was a really, really cool experience. And so what we ended up doing was doing a podcast review of Wreck-It Ralph. Non-spoilers, just talking high level, like, hey, here we got a sneak peek. Now, you are not supposed to talk about your screening experiences, and press and media are definitely not invited to these. So we were like, we're just a podcast. We don't really consider ourselves press or media, and we thought we were okay with it, And luckily for that time, we didn't get nothing happened, but we kept going to these. I think a year later we went to the Planes one and we did the same thing, and then we like immediately got on the blacklist for Disney, which like live and learn, right? But the Wreck-It Ralph one, actually a bunch of animators at the studio got, found it and were sharing it around, and we had the most downloads we'd ever had up until that point. So that got people listening, but it also got people excited because we were talking about Wreck-It Ralph, which no one up until this point had any information about. So when people were searching it, we came up. So that's also how a year later, about a year into the podcast, we decided to do a YouTube channel. And the only reason we did was because we got some leaked info, I guess you will. Someone sent us some stuff, some concept art, which now everyone has seen this concept art. Like this is not a secret, but at the time, like no one knew what Elsa looked like. No one knew what Anna looked like. And so we had all these characters. And so that's what our YouTube channel was just talking like, here, I'm not going to show you the photos, but I'm going to describe the photos to you because we didn't want it to get pulled down or to have, for some reason, our source have the photo be tied to them and then they, lose their job or whatever. So yeah. So a lot of times, a lot of our growth came from these like insider scoops or just having and talking about material that no one else had, but people were searching for. So our
Hmm.
YouTube channel, it grew 10,000 subscribers within the first year pretty quickly. And that was simply because this sounds crazy now, but no one was talking about Frozen. Like, sounds crazy,
Hmm.
after the phenomenon that it was. But we thought, okay, here's this new movie. We know it's a musical and it has two princesses. What more could you ask for in a Disney film, right? Like, this is everything. And just because Disney wasn't promoting it, there was one image that they had sent out at the time, but that wasn't it. There wasn't a teaser trailer. So we just kept putting these videos out talking about what we knew, and there were other things that we had gotten a hold of that we would share. And yeah, so that's how we grew. And it's really just, and that was our niche, right? We were like the Frozen girls on our YouTube channel because no one else was talking about it. So anytime you typed in Frozen, like, you most likely would find one of our videos.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things. I feel like Disney films in particular are not talked about as widely as other things like Star Wars and Marvel and things like that. There's so many people that go into those films and like comics and different things like that. And Disney is just one of those things I don't feel like is fully leveraged or fully explored yet. And I can totally see how Frozen went under the radar. I felt like the only thing I had seen going into that movie was a little like short with Sven and Olaf. And that was like it.
Uh-huh.
I didn't even know
Yeah.
what it was really about, especially since Disney started to veer away from calling the films like tying the films directly to like a specific princess to like make them more wide audiences. Just knowing it was Frozen, knowing it was Disney, I was going in pretty dry when I went and saw Frozen.
Yeah.
So I can
Yeah.
totally see. Hmm.
The marketing for Frozen, for the most part, really focused on the comedic sidekicks, and they didn't want to let you know, like, this is about girls, because that was the problem they had with Tangled, where with Tangled they focused, well, and the Princess and the Frog, not so much Tangled, but you could
Hmm.
you could argue a little bit Tangled, but definitely Princess and the Frog, that it was like, oh, girl protagonist, princess, the boys are saying not for me. But so this one, there was really a concerted effort, I feel, by the marketing team to just say, like, oh, look, kids, this is fun and funny, and yeah, the characters are girls, but don't worry about that, So they highlighted a lot of the other characters, which it just got, yeah, we could go to a whole discussion about that whole concept and movie advertising and whatnot, but
Hmm.
female leads, but it'll be for another day.
Yeah, it'd be like promoting The Lion King with just Timon and Pumbaa, and then going in and be like,
Right.
"Wow, this is not about Timon and Pumbaa."
Right. Absolutely.
So, what has been your favorite moment you've had when you're creating this animation content over the years?
I'd say one of the biggest highlights was within the first 2 years of starting the podcast and a year after the YouTube channel, is that we were invited to go cover the red carpet for the Frozen premiere. So that was like the
Mm.
pinnacle of everything we've been working for. We got ourselves so amped up about this movie that we, got to cover it as press and do interviews, and we didn't go to the premiere, we just
Hmm.
worked the carpet, but that, to be able to have that picture, and every how quickly everything came, it was really, really exciting. So that was really fun, and we were on the list for quite a few years after that. And now they're not really doing premieres or any screenings or any movies, so who knows the current state.
Hmm.
But that's one that will always stand out to me.
Oh man, that sounds so cool to be able to experience a premiere. I'm aware of some people that I've interacted with that have went to like England premieres, but and I guess some in America, but man, that's definitely something hopefully on the bucket list to experience
Yeah.
someday.
Yes.
um so how has your relationship with animation changed over the years? Has it, like, for me it's the love is still there, but it's a different type of relationship when you're thinking about it and like creating content for it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, absolutely. We started the podcast. We didn't want to fall into the niche of just Disney animation, even though that was our predominant love. So
Hmm.
we broadened it out to animation in general, because what if we want to talk about Anastasia or these other movies that we like? So we definitely are a Disney fans at heart, but we have an appreciation for the medium and for everything else that has happened, or all the other films that has happened, all the other films that are a part of that family, right? But definitely over the years and in the 2010s, that era, there was just an explosion of animation and animation studios. And it honestly, a few years into it, like covering and doing news stories and then doing all these podcasts and videos, it became very overwhelming because it seems like every other week there was a new animated film coming out. And at the time, any new movie that was coming out, we're press, and so we do see the press screening, and so we would write a review about it, and then we would do a podcast about it, because we wanted to have that content out there for people who were searching for it. But it just became so overwhelming that I kind of had to take a step back for a while, just to breathe. And it kind of coincided with when I had my first child, where, you're kind of my focus shifted. And so I definitely took a step back from some of the reviews and the site, because there was just so much, and it wasn't as fun anymore, because it was like, oh, I have to go to this movie. I'm not necessarily pumped about it. Like, I don't want to name names, but there's been some where it was like, oh, really? Like, this one I gotta go see. And it's not any disservice, but you're not gonna love every single movie that you see. And with the podcast, we were choosing the movies that we got to talk about. And when we shifted it to like any new release we're gonna cover, it kind of lost the fun, because it was just like a job, like, gotta cover this. And it wasn't necessarily like a paying job, which would have, to an extent, made up for it, because my big problem was I hadn't really done a great job of monetizing the site. It makes money, but not enough for, me to quit my job and whatnot, because I was more focused on my corporate job at the time and really growing that. And so for me, the podcast and the website was always a hobby, and I kind of like let it sit there, and it stayed that way because of that. Taking a break, we did put the podcast on hiatus for about a year. We still technically have released episodes every single year, so I can say we've done. But it was about a year that we took a break, and that was really needed, just to step away from it. The website was still going. We have volunteer writers. It's great experience for resume and for college kids who need writing experience in the industry. So that was always kind of chugging along and going. But like my involvement just took about a year, and that tremendously helped. And I do think for other content creators, you might be afraid to step away. And for sure, we lost a lot of momentum. Like, I will say that. We lost a lot of momentum with the podcast and the site and the YouTube channel, but you have to think about you and what's best for you. And ultimately that, you could have spiraled down a completely other way if I would have kept going, so definitely you need to, if you're feeling that way, it's okay to take a break.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely understand where you're coming from with getting trapped in kind of the rat race of trying to keep up with whatever the fresh content is. I feel like more and more recently I've been asked why aren't I covering like all of these different Disney Channel animated shows? And I'm like, yeah, I can't, I don't have the bandwidth to like keep up with all of them. And really it's difficult for me to get into something, especially when I don't have any like background with it. Like it's easier, it was easier to find a way into like Tangled and DuckTales, knowing I love Donald Duck and like Rapunzel already. Whereas like these different shows, it's just, there's completely different concepts. And so each time it can be a lot. That is
you
for
had
sure.
An underlying passion with those other ones that sparked it and made, and you probably wanted to do it on your own accord, right?
Yep.
Versus kind of it just being the job. You got to cover it for the job. So,
Yep, exactly.
Which you can do, but if you're already at that place where it's hard to get the motivation, it'll definitely be hard to keep it. So I think you're making a smart decision by just kind of focusing currently on, as a team of one.
Yep.
Truly is your zone of genius.
That, absolutely. It's a process trying to find the balance between doing what makes logical business sense and doing what you feel like is the right move for you personally, I feel like is a very difficult line to walk every day making content. So in parallel to your podcast, you were also going through and working on your corporate job, but what made you decide to study marketing and continue to a point where you earned an MBA? Why was that the path you decided to go down?
Yeah, marketing has always been something that I've just loved. We were talking earlier about the trailers and different aspects of how animated films, like that's just how my brain is wired.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was going to college, initially I wanted to go and in high school wanted to be a doctor. But then kind of talked myself out of it because I thought it with business, kind of the sky's the limit for income. Potentially, you could start your own business and sell it or do X millions of dollars, right? There's no limit as an owner of a business. But if you're just a doctor, like, yeah, you're going to be making bank but there's kind of always like a limit. And so I kind of like in my mind was thinking at it from a very business perspective of how
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go. And then when it came to time to choose a major in undergrad, marketing obviously was the one that appealed most to me because it was fun and exciting and just made sense with how my brain worked. And then when I got my MBA, continued to study marketing because that's again where my passion laid and where I wanted to go. So yeah, I think it was very natural for me to move into marketing because it just my brain loves it, so it wasn't ever really a hard decision to pursue it.
Mm-hmm. And so then could you talk about the corporate job that initially really excited you? What did you do as a senior product manager?
Yeah. So I got my MBA, and as one part of your MBA, I was in the full-time program. You need to get an internship. So I landed this internship at GoDaddy, which is an
Mm-hmm.
internet company. Most people have probably purchased their domain name from GoDaddy. They have hosting and websites and a whole variety of other things that they offer. And so I got a sales and marketing internship, which right down my alley. So pumped.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right here in town, even better. Like it was checking off all of the boxes for everything that I was looking for in an internship. And very quickly became just in love with the company and the culture and everything that the company was about. And so, I stayed on. I did my internship and then I stayed on part-time during my second year. And then midway through my second year, they offered me a full-time position that I couldn't pass up.
Mm-hmm.
So my final semester, I was working full-time while also going to school full-time in person. So that was very stressful. But man, as soon as I graduated, it was like I had so much free time on my hands because I didn't have school, I didn't have studying. And so I started as a program manager at GoDaddy, and basically was just given little odds and end projects here and there to solve. And I was always like the girl who would just get it done. If something wasn't being done or it was just causing a problem, they'd give it to me and I'd get it done. And slowly over time, my role, I started getting more and more things. And so I launched this little product about a year in, and I had my own little product suite and
Mm-hmm.
was growing it and worked with the sales team and created collateral and marketing materials. And then, okay, well, she did great with that one. So they gave me another one. And, so I built that product up from scratch. And then my two biggest services were eventually I launched our SEO service, which stands for search engine optimization. And we had to basically, companies, they're great at doing what they do. Like you're a small business, you're a plumber, you're a hairstylist, but you don't know how to optimize your website so it appears in the search results. And that's where we would come in. You would pay us as your agency, basically, and we would do all the SEO work for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that became my biggest project. I launched that from the bottom up, everything from what do we want this product to entail? What are the requirements? And I was still a program manager. I wasn't a product manager at the time, which is a very specific role in like the tech world. And that went so well that I did one for a social media management service, just added that one on. And so I just kept like getting more and more responsibilities and products. And then eventually I was promoted to senior product manager, which a senior product manager or a product manager in the tech space, I don't think very many people know if you're outside, but traditionally a product manager is you're responsible for the product. But in the tech world, you're responsible for creating the product and working with your developers.
Mm.
What are the requirements? What new features are we adding? You work in these two week sprints where every 2 weeks you're adding new things, new features or fixing bugs, and you're prioritizing the list of requirements for the developers to work on. So eventually that got added to my plate as we grew. But yeah, I was really lucky because I was in a department that was sort of like in the corner doing its own thing.
Hmm.
We were small enough that we could just do our own thing. We weren't one of like the big flagship products that just had the huge marketing budgets and all the attention, right? Like
Hmm.
our revenue was basically rounding error at the end of the day for a company that does billions of dollars. So it was a great opportunity because I was kind of like the CEO of my own little product lines, and was able to be scrappy because we didn't have the resources and just had to figure out ways to get products out there and to launch
Hmm.
and to grow. So yeah, it was an amazing experience and I absolutely loved it. And I feel like I learned so many things just because I was thrown into different roles, and that's really where I thrived. And for like a lot of people, you're going to be asked to do things in your job that you've never done before. Some people are going to shy away from that and say no. But if you just say yes and figure out how to do it, then that will present another opportunity and you just say yes and you get it done. And hopefully you don't fail, but you never know until you try. And a lot of times you don't know what you're doing in your job. Like a lot of people don't know. Everyone's kind of figuring out. Yes, some companies are set up a little better, but in my position it was like no one had done this before. So
Hmm.
that's what I did. I kind of like did all sorts of things and it was an amazing experience and I loved my time there.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds extremely exciting because you're in this organization, this well-known organization. You're getting the chance to like create these things and like manage a team. Like yeah, you really got to be that CEO within like a safer environment to
Yeah.
actually experience that, kind of like begin those entrepreneurial tendencies and see if it was right for you. And it definitely, and that's awesome that you got the opportunity to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then and that eventually transitioned into you deciding that you wanted to be self-employed. And so what was that moment you decided you wanted to go out on your own? And how did you decide what you were going to pursue with that new business?
Yeah. So, I had come back from maternity leave from my second, um, and the 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 world had just changed a little bit in the company. It had gone public over the past few years, and my boss wasn't there anymore. And it really,
Mm.
your manager does can make or break your job. And it was just different.
Mm-hmm.
There was big mergers and acquisitions that were happening, and roles were shifting around, and I just wasn't excited to do it anymore. I was
Mm-hmm.
really stressed. I couldn't sleep at night because I was thinking about this job where that never happened before. I'm the type of person, I put my head on my pillow and I'm out. Like I don't dwell on things. That's just not my personality. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have anxiety in that way. I just like let it come, right? And it was really bothering me and I couldn't get over it. And so finally I was like, you know what? I either need to find another position at the company, which I had been interviewing for others and went very far and with multiple roles. But then it kind of got in my head. I had friends who were entrepreneurs, and one friend in particular, and she kind of was like, talking to me about it. And entrepreneurship is hard, right? It seems fun and exciting, but it really is hard. And I knew that. But kind of once I got in my head that, maybe I could do it on my own,
Mm-hmm.
and do my own thing, I couldn't really get it out. And it just felt right even though I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. And there will be people
Mm-hmm.
that give you advice that say, don't leave your job until your side hustle has moved up enough to sustain itself. That absolutely is true. But luckily for me, my husband works. And so we were able to look at the budget and make the finances work, either way. And so, and because I was feeling just not feeling it,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, why am I here? Why am I here if I'm not happy? I'm not going to be wasting my time doing something where I'm no longer happy. The passion isn't there anymore and the fire isn't there. And plus, especially when I had these two kids where I could be
Mm-hmm.
spending time with them. So that was really a big motivator where like, who knows? Now everyone's with their kids. Little did I know. that I could have had a corporate job and still been my kids 24/7. But all joking aside, it just felt right. And so I quit. I put in, I kind of knew, like I put in my 2 weeks and then went off on my own. And I gave myself a week or so just to detox and not jump right into things. Cause I think that is something that you have the tendency to do. You think, well, I now all that income's gone and you want to replace it very quickly. And you especially want to get started again. You're starting from, for me, it's not like I had a side hustle or had a side business. I obviously have rotoscopers, but I was wanting to do something different. So I needed that time just to like move, like separate, these two big phases in my life. And yeah, so then I always knew that I wanted to do content creation. I was a co-host on their YouTube channel at GoDaddy.
Oh.
It wasn't my job. It was more, they did a big company casting call, and someone messaged me. I didn't even know what it was. They're like, hey, they're doing this thing. I can't tell you what it is, but just like create a video talking about something you love. And I'm like, I love video. I have my YouTube channel. Like I'm not afraid. I have the podcast. I'm not afraid to talk. I'm not afraid to be on camera. So I shot this video having no idea what it was for. And then got picked to be one of the co-hosts on this channel. And so that wasn't even part of my job. I didn't get paid for that. It was just something that I would fly out a few days, a month, and I would go shoot the videos. And then I'd go back to my real job, right? And I'd like answer emails in between because I did still have my regular job. And so I knew that I was really good on video, or I felt really good on video, right? And was confident there. And so I knew I wanted to do something with YouTube. I knew that whatever products I ended up offering, I wanted the way that my audience found me to be through YouTube, right? Like some people it's through their blog or Instagram or their whatever. But for me, I was very clear that, okay, YouTube is something that like, that's where I want to be, like the start of my funnel. And so I started making videos, and the videos were all over the place initially because I didn't know what my niche was going to be and what I was going to focus on. And so I was totally okay experimenting. So the first videos on my channel was how to win Instagram giveaways, because that was something I was winning, like a giveaway a week. I was winning like bikes and like big ticket prizes. And so I was like, well, I'll share my tips. So, there's that, there's a budgeting video. And then slowly I started honing in on kind of YouTube video tips, because that's what felt easy and natural. And so that's kind of where I'm focusing right now, is helping content creators get started on YouTube. Because again, this wasn't my first YouTube channel that I'd started. So I did have that other channel that from the rotoscopers that had experience with. So I know the ins and outs of being a content creator, not only on YouTube, but podcasts as well. So that's where I'm at right now. So going to be launching some products in the next few months, and I'm pretty excited. Like I'm very happy with how it's all worked out. And I do coaching as a way to, pay the bills, if you will. I have business coaching that I offer clients, and I do have YouTube clients, and then I have other small business clients, because at GoDaddy, our main customers were small businesses, small one mom and pop shops, one person entrepreneurs, right? Like people who have an idea or have a local business and they need help getting started online. So I'm using kind of the expertise of that world as well as YouTube, and that's what I'm kind of doing with my coaching.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That makes sense. It's building upon your skills and using the things that you learned and being able to help others do that themselves.
Yep.
So now to kind of connect your work with Animation Addicts podcast and your business experience, looking at the current ecosystem of content creators, what do you think is the most common way creators hold themselves back when they are marketing themselves?
I think the biggest thing that content creators do wrong is they take too long finding their niche. And I think they think, I'm passionate about X, so I'm just going to start talking about it. But then it's like all over the place, kind of like my initial videos. There's no one singular focus that if someone's going to come onto your videos or your podcast, they typically are coming because they want the information and the content, not for you. So I think people really think it's about them. when it's not. Starting out, it's about the content. So it's very easy for how-to content, like how to change a tire or how to do whatever. If you're doing how to change a tire, your next video is you and your friends doing a vlog laughing, someone's going to come to your channel and be super confused at what does this person have to offer me? Because I came here for this and I love this, but they don't have any more videos or content on that. So I'm going to peace out. This isn't for me. And so yes, we are all very multi-passionate people and entrepreneurs and content creators, but you really have to hone in and think about the audience and what they're looking for. So that's my biggest piece of advice is focus on the content and people coming into the content. Okay, if someone found this one video, what are the next types of videos that they'd be interested in watching about those content? Like eventually people will come for you and they don't care what you do because they just love you so much. And so a random vlog with you and your friends on the weekend, they love because they just can't get enough of you and your personality. And so that's totally fine. But starting out with that, it's a really hard road to just like market yourself and like how fun you are, how cool you are. Like I love talking about all these random things. There are podcasts where people I've heard where it's just people talking and shooting the breeze about random stuff, and it's different every episode. And they think it's cool because they think they're cool, and they think their friends are cool, their co-hosts. But to random people coming in, I hate to break it to you, it's not the case. It's got to be about the content first.
Yeah, it's like, what's the immediate mission statement of this channel? Like, what do you get out of it? Yeah, and that's something that's difficult to do, but I agree that I think it's something that, especially in the early days of becoming a content creator, that's something that needs to be discovered in a pretty quick way, at least in the first maybe like year. Definitely make content, but figure out what people know you for.
And try and fail, make content and have 0 views on it and just learn the lesson and try something else. It's totally okay. We're not saying that you have to know right away. Like you said, even a year of exploration and figuring it out. It takes some people very quickly and other people longer, and be okay with that. But just be conscious enough that that's your ultimate end goal, is that you're trying to find your home.
Yep. Find the people who are going to surround you and support you.
Yep.
So what do you want your animation podcast and website to evolve into now? What are your goals with them, especially since you're now self-employed? How does that fit into your mission?
Yeah. So I've always kept the website running, even when, we took that hiatus, because I loved the hub that it had created for Animation Addicts. And that was always my first name, Animation Addicts, but the domain was like $3,000 and I couldn't afford it at the time. So if I go back, I would just find the money somehow and buy it. But I want the YouTube channel and the podcast and the website to be a place for Animation Addicts. It's something that's for fans, by fans. And it's a place where, whether you're a teenager or a young adult, you can go and you can find people like you. Because that's what we get feedback and messages and emails all the time. People saying, I had no one to talk about this with, and then I found your podcast, and it's like I'm listening to my friends, and you're my friends. And it's true. And so that's really what I want the website to be. There's definitely a lot of news focus, and the news cycle is just so fast that I'm not sure I want to keep up with the news so much anymore, versus transitioning to a lot more evergreen content that fans are interested in. There's a variety of things, but opinion articles and reviews and top 10 lists, or just things that are a little bit more widely accessible, and they won't, get 0 views after 6 months because no one cares about the new posters for X movie because that movie came out 2 years ago, right? So I really want it to be more of a hub where you can come and explore your passion for animation with others just like you. And it's been hard because there's like so much. There's the podcast, the channel, and the website. And so it's been hard to kind of manage all of that and grow. And the podcast really hasn't, the YouTube channel, still kind of, confused on where we want to take that, because a while it was Frozen content, and then we were heavy on the reviews and even like Blu-ray reviews. We were big on that, and like art book reviews. I have like a giant library of art books that have been sent to me over the years. But I want it to shift the YouTube channel to be more like things that the fans are interested in, video essays or like deep dives, but then like that's your area of expertise now. So I kind of like, I can't like step on his toes, and Super Carlin Brothers. So I'm just kind of in a weird place with it. So I haven't really done much. But I would like to grow it, I would like to grow it for sure. But even now I'm kind of in this transition phase of like, what's the next real phase of rotoscopers and really monetize it and make it something really big. That'd be cool.
Yeah. That's something I've been thinking about a lot now that I'm doing content creation full time outside of college. Is it feels like there's more pressure to do something more with it or to evolve it and find different ways of doing it and ensuring it grows into the future. And it's a hard hard thing to do when you get into it specifically for one facet of it, like for me making videos, for you making like your podcast. And so developing that is a difficult thing to often do. Have you ever considered like doing video versions of your podcasts and putting them onto YouTube in addition to like YouTube specific content?
Yeah. You mean like taking an existing podcast and porting it onto the channel, or?
Like just like moving forward with episodes and like recording them.
Yeah, there actually is a chunk of episodes that we did live. We did have video for.
Oh.
And they are on there. They're kind of like the mid 100s. Like I couldn't tell you the numbers, but I know Finding Nemo's one. That's one that comes to mind. Maybe that's 134. Let's see how well I know my content. Let's see. Rotoscopers.com. This is riveting podcast material. 134. Is it Finding Nemo? Probably not. Probably not. Anyway, it's Finding Nemo. But they, we were, oh, it is. Look at me.
Wow, you're good. There you go.
134 is our Finding Nemo episode. But it just, our podcasts are pretty polished. And so when we would just live stream them, they weren't as polished, obviously, because we would just throw the live stream up there. And then I don't know if we would spend as much time editing the final product, but I just wasn't ever satisfied with how the final podcast version turned out. And we always had audio video issues. Like someone's internet would die or their video would go away. And so it just created a lot of issues. So now we don't really mess with video. We keep the bandwidth hog low and everyone just records their own audio and we splice them all together at the end. But yeah, moving back into video, especially since this has probably been 4 years, I think it probably has evolved a lot more where we could try that out again. For sure, because then it taps into that video audience.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, that's just something I'm always curious about with podcasts. How do you choose? But and that's coming from someone who really likes using YouTube and who's like mainly built an audience with YouTube. Is that I just, anytime I come up with anything, it always seems to go back to like, oh, maybe I should do it on YouTube. So I'm curious to see how other people.
Yeah, and those videos probably have 1,000 to 2,000 views. I mean, so we've never promoted them and people are finding them. But when I look at the audience retention rate on those, it's like people realize what it is 30 seconds in and drop. It's like a 1% retention rate, which that does affect you in the algorithm, so it's, like creating a separate channel for people who just want podcasts on, like what you're doing, like I love this channel because of his long form video interviews and they subscribe and they watch versus someone randomly finding it on our normal channel. So it's definitely something to think about for sure, because video is very important. It is the future.
Yeah. Audience retention. Anytime it seems like, at least for me, outside of like the 14-15 minute range, it's like the drop is so much more abrupt. But I feel like it's mainly based off of what your audience kind of expects from you. It kind of goes back to like whatever niche you fulfill for people. Is because it seems like channels like Defunctland or Yesterworld, where their whole channel is built off of like 20-minute documentary style videos. It doesn't matter. they don't need that insanely like aggressive hook right at the beginning, which I like struggle with because I've tried to evolve and to make sure that it's engaging immediately and pulls people through. Optimizing content.
I know we could talk about it for hours, you and I know.
Yeah. It's a game in and of itself.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, finally, Morgan, I want you to tell the listeners what you feel is the number one piece of advice that would help them follow their dreams.
So the number one piece of advice would be just to do it and just to get started. Because I think even in my corporate career with all different projects I was given, or even starting a podcast and a website, I'd never done it before. And you can do anything with the internet and Google. You can find all the answers that you need using Google, right? So what's to prevent you? And I think people get in their head, well, I've never done this before. I don't know how. But really, you just need to get started. And the quality is not going to be like it will be a few months or even a few years down the line. Absolutely. But the fact that you're starting and you're being consistent with it, that would be the number two. Just start and then be consistent. That is going to give you so much of an advantage over the people who aren't starting, or the people who start and then they drop off and then they come back and they do it again. When it comes to following your dreams, whether it's I want to work for this company or I want to be an artist, it's just take those little pieces one day at a time and you'll get better, and you'll add to what you're doing a little teeny piece at a time. So don't worry about knowing everything. If you just want to start a podcast and all you have is, your phone and that's it, like start with that, and then add a fancy microphone, and then add, an audio mixer, and then add whatever, you'll realize that once you master one little piece, it gives you so much more freedom in your head to add on the next piece and the next piece. And then you'll look back a year later and think like, wow, this is actually pretty easy. But if you wouldn't have started, you would never have known or gotten there.
Yep. Moving forward, those skills compound, your momentum compounds over time if you just keep going. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, Morgan. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
Yes. Thanks for having me. True honor.
Yeah, thank you. To all of you who are listening, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. And as I continue to share the stories of people who are following their passions and achieving their dreams, it'd mean a lot if you shared the podcast with a friend and consider reviewing Wotso Radio on iTunes. To all you fun people who are out in the world, thank you so much for listening and have a magical day.